Hi, everyone. This is Megan.
And this is Steven.
And this is the Synchrony Podcast, where we talk about transforming apostolic dating culture and ending loneliness in the church. And we are back to our old habits of drinking coffee at midnight.
11:17 p.m., ma'am.
Yeah. We had kind of like a week off for our 10 days of prayer.
Yeah.
Which was awesome.
We want to say because it was for spiritual reasons, but really it was. But also the main time that we record is like between 10 and 11.
Yeah.
And every time we had prayer, it was at 10.
Yeah.
So we realized that was kind of a scheduling oops because we couldn't really make time for the podcast.
Hey, when you have toddlers who fight sleep, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to be back.
Yep.
I've
me
missed
too.
this.
Yeah.
So we have some announcements. We'll save those for the end. Can we do a quick congratulations, though?
Yeah, do it.
I want to say 2 shout outs. One, congratulations to brother and sister Neil Blue on their wedding.
Congratulations.
It happened the weekend of Easter weekend.
That's right.
What a beautiful time to start a new adventure.
That's right. They were beautiful and they look so happy, and congratulations, y'all.
So excited for them. So excited.
Mr. and Mrs. Blue.
Yeah. So excited to see what God's going to do through their ministry. Just, they're awesome.
Yeah.
And then I want to give a huge shout out to Carlos and Liz.
Carlos and Liz.
Congratulations on your engagement, guys.
Yeah.
They have a really beautiful story. Yeah, I'm really proud of that couple. They've just.
We're proud of all of our couples.
I know, but I never pick. I can't pick favorites because every time I think about a couple, I get all excited about it. But they just have a really neat story.
Yeah.
So hopefully we get to talk about it with them at some point. I think they just have a very cool path to each other. So congratulations to happy couples everywhere. We're just excited for you guys. Woo. It's going to be awesome.
Yep.
One thing we will talk about now, we'll circle back to the other announcements later, but we are prepping for some summer sales.
Yeah, that's right. We are.
And the way we're going to do it this year is just a few like flash sales over the course of a weekend.
Yep.
So we're not going to run a massive sale that you guys have to hear about for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. We're going to do our first sale over Memorial Weekend.
Yep. 40% off.
40% off. It'll start Friday of Memorial Weekend and continue through Monday, which is the holiday.
40% off the consultation.
Correct. So if you are interested in matchmaking, if you haven't worked with us yet to actually do the matchmaking process and you want to get started, that's a great time to take advantage of that. We'll be posting about it on social media. We don't have the coupon code out yet. But if you follow us on Facebook or Instagram, you'll see the info about it and we'll have the link up.
Yep.
So you can go get your 40% off consultation.
Yep. And if you know friends that have been thinking about doing it, please send that to them. Let them know that the sale's coming up. Also, if you don't want to pay it all at once, we have a way to break it up into 4 separate payments. So just so that way you don't have to take a big chunk out of your money.
Yeah, you can select Klarna or Afterpay as your payment, your tender type basically in the shopping cart. Okay, so I think this is going to be a slightly different flavor of podcast than normal.
Okay.
Because I want to set the expectation from the beginning that we are not going to necessarily deliver a lot of concrete suggestions.
Uh-oh.
Well, yeah, this is a topic that's bigger than a single podcast.
Okay.
And I'm mainly I want to talk about it for 2 reasons. The first reason is that it's been bothering me. It's the main reason. And the second reason was I put out a little poll on Instagram, on our Instagram stories last week when we skipped an episode, to ask people to kind of help us vote on what they wanted us to talk about. I put a few options. This was one of them. And this had the most varied responses. They were all pretty neck and neck. It wasn't exactly the most popular response, but it had the most involvement from men and from women and people like in different walks of life. So I think it's important that we kind of start opening up the conversation.
Yeah.
I want to talk about our men.
Okay.
And whether or not they're okay.
Okay, how?
I think I'm developing a theory, and it's unproven, untested, I'd need to go do a bunch of research and talk to people and do some interviews. And maybe that's brain candy I could tackle for another day. Right now, my theory is that we are losing apostolic men in their late 20s and early 30s. The men who remain are up against incredibly challenging odds to both stay firmly grounded in their faith and also to find a healthy relationship. And yeah, I think that this is a problem that is creating a lot of the loneliness that we are seeing in our female community in their late 30s, early 40s, even into their early 50s.
Okay. Just a clarifying question. Who is we? You said we.
We as like apostolics, I guess. Like
I know what you meant. But
yeah. I'm hesitant. So the reason why I'm like tiptoeing around this as making any kind of certain statements is we have a very small body of data about this, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty like, you know, specific to our little community of people. And overall, throughout the course of all of the work we've done with Synchrony, including our beta testing and all the people that we've brought in, we've probably spoken to I'm gonna guess between 80 and 90 men at different stages of life overall.
Yeah.
Since the very beginning. And so it's a small sample size, it's a small data pool. But based on what I've heard from women, what I've seen at conferences and what we've observed in the places that we've been to, and the guys that we've spoken to, I think I'm starting to build a theory of some really deep, complicated challenges that our guys are encountering. And I want to just open up the conversation today. I don't necessarily expect us to solve this problem over this call or even provide a lot of concrete plans for what to do about it. But I just don't think everyone sees it. And I want to just shine a light on it for a little while.
All right. So where do we start?
So let's start with the elephant in the room, which is that a lot of women
What'd you call me?
Stephen.
Sorry.
A lot of women I talk to who are between the ages of like, let's say 35 to 50, right? Feel like there are no options for them.
Yeah.
That there are just no men, right? And number one, I don't think that's necessarily true. We have met single men in that age range,
Yeah.
right? So they do exist. They're not a lost, species. But there's this sense that there are just not enough men to go around, right? And there might be something to that at a very, very high level. I went and did a little bit of digging on the UPCI demographic statistics that the UPCI puts together every year. And they actually spoke or emailed back and forth a little bit with the team that is responsible for putting that together. It's a fantastic report. Anyone can go download it. We can drop a link in the description. But basically, they do a statistically representative sample of churches across the country, and they use that to generate a set of demographic estimates. So kind of like a guesstimation of how many different varieties of people are in the church. And they don't differentiate between single and married in this. So I don't have specific stats about the number of single women and the number of single men that exist in the church. And once again, this is just the UPCI. But let's just talk about their estimate for a minute. I did the calculations, and if I were to take all the women and men that they numbered in that estimate and just divided them out evenly to every single UPCI church in the country, there would be 44 additional women than there would be men.
In every single church.
In every single church. So we can...
So there is a gender discrepancy.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say we have more women than we have men in the UPCI, if our estimates hold true.
Now, to be fair, that does not account for married women who go to church by themselves. That's like...
Sure.
Because my mom was that growing up.
100%.
So like that, I have a feeling that could be a decent portion.
Yeah, and it doesn't, again, we're not differentiating between marital status there. So we don't know, there are single men in the church because we know them and we've met them.
Yeah.
But there does seem to be, and we've started to see this in our synchrony data too. We have more success with men in their 20s, so who are young and have not yet been married, 20s and early 30s, right? And then we have a good number of men who are like 55 and older. And most of those men are re-entering singleness or have re-entered singleness after a loss or a divorce.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have young men who have never been married and men who have been married before who are returning to singleness on either end. But we don't have many men experiencing extended singleness, which is that I have never been married and I'm single past when I expected to be compared to the number of women that we have.
Yeah. Do you have a theory of why that is?
Yeah. I think that and I think there could be 1,000 different root causes to this. I don't think our men are surviving extended singleness. And by surviving, I mean staying in church.
Okay. So,
Let me asterisk. I don't think they're surviving it as well or successfully in the sense that fewer men are able to maintain their connection to the church through that compared to single women.
okay.
And again, like this would take more data. So I can't point to a root cause. And I'm sure if we went and interviewed 100 different men who had backslidden in that period of time, each of them would have different reasons for why that was the case.
Oh, sure.
So everything I'm about to throw out is conjecture.
Yeah.
Neither of us has been a single backslidden man during that phase of life. So,
I hope not.
Yeah. So we don't know, right? I have some theories and I want to run them by you. And I kind of just want I want to get a temperature check of like, in your experience as a man, how big of an impact do you think this thing would have on someone's walk, right?
Okay.
During that period of life. So, my first theory is that men struggle more with, let me think about how to phrase this.
No. Be candid.
I think men end up falling into sexual sin.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
Not because men are more visual. We've already debunked that a little bit. But because society pressures men to be sexually promiscuous as a status symbol, broader American society, not church society. And society markets to men that they are, like pornography for the most part is targeted at men,
Yeah.
right? A lot of sensual sexual content in our just modern world is driven toward men, and men are getting the message constantly that sex is something they should be seeking out, and if they're not, then they're kind of less of a man.
Yeah.
Does that resonate with you?
Yes, I absolutely do think that is the target audience for sure. I can't speak for men who come into church later in their teen or adult life, because I was raised in church,
Right.
and so from a very young age, I was taught with the mindset of like, this is something that you abstain from, and this is a core value of ours, right? And this should be your core value, and it was. I got made fun of in high school for being a virgin. I got I got the peer pressure of the world for making these decisions. But that being said, the same pressure is still there, especially like if I can't imagine having lived a life outside of the church and then coming into the church with the memory of your former life.
I think that's true. I also think that because, and I hope I don't step on anybody's toes here, because in the same way that I think we haven't developed
It's hard to do when you're sitting down.
Stephen.
Sorry. Come on. This is what you hired me for.
You get what you pay for, folks.
I deserve a raise.
Yeah. So, okay.
Stepping on toes.
Right. So I hope I don't step on toes here, but in the same way that we haven't formed a healthy apostolic dating culture,
Yeah.
I don't think we've really formed a healthy apostolic conversation around sexuality.
Yeah.
And so I think, tell me if you feel like this is wrong, I think that men are more likely to experience not only temptation specifically targeted at them for sexual sin within the church. And I'm talking about pornography mostly, but also things like online solicitation and inappropriate phone relationships and internet relationships with actual people, right? And then experience condemnation around that.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's that having premarital sex or getting addicted to pornography or just experiencing any of those things immediately pushes people out of church. I think it's the secondary symptoms of that happens. Men are more susceptible to it because it's targeted right at them. And we don't have the resources in all churches to really restore those young men and reconnect them back to the body when that happens.
Yeah. I think the connection back to the body is the biggest part.
Yeah.
I think pornography is going to always play a role. I think the sexual sin's always going to play a role.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what made the biggest difference for me was accountability.
Right.
And mentor discipleship like roles.
Mm-hmm.
And by no means were my mentors perfect.
Sure.
But I was talking to our friend Sean,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just the act of like knowing that if you have an accountability partner,
Mm-hmm.
like you should be doing it for yourself, but also if you have someone checking in on you and you're being truly transparent, it helps motivate me to stay away from mental or like pornography, sexual sin, right?
Sure.
And the idea of if they're checking on me and in on me, and I want to be transparent with them, I don't want to disappoint them, right? And so I think there needs to be a more discipleship focus.
So you're bringing me up to another point, which is another part of this theory, which is that I think that we have discipleship gaps with our men.
Yeah.
And a big part of that is I think that we lack brotherhood relationships.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this as a woman observing outside of it, but I think it's relatively rare for men to feel safe forming those really vulnerable connections with men, like it's like the same. I don't know when it became, I hope I don't offend anybody here. I don't know when it became gay to have close male friendships. You know what I mean? And I know I'm generalizing there, but when like it started to get weird for men to be really, really close to each other, it seems like that happened at some point where like, does that strike you as true? Where like it like
You're talking to someone from West Palm.
That's true. West Palm. Well, and this is the thing, like West Palm.
Sorry for backstory for those who don't know. I come from a church and a youth group where we were very, very, very close knit.
And your church prioritized the mentorship of young men, not as pulpit ministers necessarily, but mentorship of young men in a variety of different ministries.
It was definitely pulpit focused for a decent chunk of it, but
yeah, but not all of them.
Yeah, they encouraged other ministries though too.
Right, and there was a lot of, I think, those brotherhood relationships that were built, intentionally built, not that just formed because guys like to hang out, but that were intentionally structured by the leadership, which was huge.
Yeah,
and your church generated a whole pile of great, effective, godly young apostolic men who then expatriated to a bunch of other churches, married great women, and are doing great things in the kingdom. I think that isn't as common in other churches.
But what's funny? What your point that you made is very true though, and you're even guilty of saying this.
Okay.
Like people definitely made like sexuality references about us being really close knit, especially the guys, and they would call us gay,
right?
Or like, look at those homosexuals, like, and they were saying it with joking intentions.
This is sort of like funny camp locker room talk, but
but at the same time, like we hung out so much, we we were not afraid to be close to each other in a appropriate way.
Yeah, you guys had brotherhood
Yeah.
relationships. I remember when I came to your church when I was looking to go to school, I
Yeah.
was noticing these young men in the altar weeping with each other
Yeah.
in a way that I was only used to seeing like at camp meeting, right? Like when everybody was weeping, right?
Yeah.
And there was a lot of vulnerability and a lot of connection between men. I don't think that's as common.
No, it's not. I mean, now that I've been to other churches, just from moving,
Mhm.
I was fully expecting to see that more, and it's not as common.
No, and it like I have this is a comparison from like the animal world, and I'm not trying to say this got weird. I'm not
A
trying
bunch of Neanderthals.
no. I'm not trying to say I'm not trying to say that this is how men biologically function at all. I'm just
Sure.
drawing a parallel. You know how in like prides of lions or
Yeah,
other
yeah.
like large predatory or even like groups of apes, right? Young males tend to form their own bands and leave the pride or leave the what are you laughing at now?
Sorry. I have a 5-year-old daughter who watches cartoons,
Uh-huh.
and you're like a band of young apes, and I just immediately imagine seeing the movie Sing with the ape who sings,
Yeah.
and imagined a band of apes from West Palm. Sorry.
Okay. This is going to be a hard podcast to edit. But
No, just leave it in.
okay. So it's that thing where like in a social group of animals,
Yeah.
right? Young males as they rise to sexual maturity and prominence have to leave the group
Yeah.
because there are already powerful males that have established their domains
Yeah.
in that group and they can't coexist. That's how it works in lions and apes. That is not how it's designed to work in the body of Christ.
Yeah.
But I think that attitude kind of persists
Mhm.
where if you have, you know, dominant men who are very secure in their positions, who I feel like it's possible in some churches for young men who don't fit a very narrow stereotype of what success looks like to get crowded out of the church. And I'm painting with a very broad brush
Yeah.
here.
I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater
Yeah.
and like poo poo on a bunch of churches that struggle, because like
No.
here's the thing is like I guarantee you there's small churches that have incredible discipleship, and large churches that don't do great. So it's like
100%.
so it's one of these things. I think the moral of what we are trying to talk about today is that discipleship and accountability needs to be a higher priority no matter what size church you're in.
I don't even think it has to do with size, right?
I know, but some people might think the bigger church, you have a bystander effect, right? Where like, oh, someone else will do it, someone else will do it. And I think we need people to start taking initiative.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also just like kind of a lack of urgency around it, right? So like there's this idea, and this is like an American cultural idea, right? That I read an article about this years ago. I'd have to go dig it out to see if I could find the one that I read about how we set up men for failure because we create this narrative of like extended adolescence, right? Like be wild, go crazy, sow your wild oats, be a little rebellious, be the bad boy, and then you turn 31 and suddenly you need to have a 401k, 2.5 kids and a mortgage,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's this horrible state of whiplash
Yeah.
where we encourage that sort of like funny, rebellious attitude in young men. And then all of a sudden there's a hard cutoff where we suddenly expect responsibility and stability, right? Yeah. And I think sometimes that can happen in the church too, where we have this concept of like, boys will be boys. Like our teenage boys are a little bit goofy and they're a little wild and maybe some of them are struggling a little bit, but that's just the phase of life they're in. They're in that rebellious phase. And we shrug it off as a phase when in fact it's this critical decision period.
Yeah.
Of whether or not they're going to stay grounded in the truth or get pulled away. And I don't mean to suggest that dating is the only thing that causes that decline in connection by any stretch, but I do think it's an exacerbating factor when there might not be someone in the church who feels available to them as a dating partner, either because there really isn't anyone there or because there's all kinds of barriers to actually dating,
Yeah.
right? Whereas a guy in the church who is living a relatively, clean life in the world is a really upstanding and attractive individual,
Yeah.
right? And there might be potential for relationships in the world that are just so much easier.
Yeah.
So it's not that I think that I don't want people to listen to this and hear, oh, what she's saying is that dating is causing young men to leave the church. No.
No.
Dating isn't causing young men to leave the church. Sexual lust or sin is not causing young men to leave the church. But I think those things and a lack of consistent connection to the body and a lack of a process of brotherly edification creates gaps where men can fall through,
Yeah.
you know? And I also think that, again, I know that I'm creating stereotypes here, right? But let's say that we're like at General Conference or Youth Congress or National Youth Convention or some large gathering of apostolics, right? And you're kind of just observing the flow of people mingling. What would be the indicators to you watching someone walk by that is a successful apostolic man or an apostolic man of high regard?
This is an overgeneralization,
Mm-hmm.
but probably someone who has some high level of charisma.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who is remotely displaying like the fruits of the Spirit,
Yeah.
right? I see them interacting with people and showing grace and being gentle and like loving.
Mm-hmm.
If it's in a church setting, probably someone who is active and shows a level of authority in the altar.
Mm.
If it's someone that's like, I see ministering on the platform or preaching from the platform, if that's my level of like probably assuming that they have some level of, I don't want to call it authority, but
Get a little bit more concrete. What do they look like?
I don't know. I like the first thing that comes to my mind is like,
Okay, we can't call out anymore. We can't put this man on blast.
what? No, I'm saying like that's, I mean,
Okay, so conventionally attractive. Sorry, but this is weird.
no, I mean, I grew up around like brother being that guy, right?
Sure. So conventionally attractive,
Yeah.
well-fitted suit.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice shoes,
Very, very commanding voice.
commanding voice, charisma you talked
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like nice haircut, right? Like effort into appearance,
Yeah, sure.
which connotes a certain level of money into that appearance too. I just want to say, like,
Sure.
you don't get a super well-fitting 3-piece suit for super cheap, right?
Sure.
Platform ministry,
Yeah.
potentially, right?
Using the gifts.
Sure. Beautiful woman.
Sure.
So none of those things are bad, right? All those things are great. None of those things are bad to aspire to either, or to desire, or to have. The point that I'm trying to make is that most men cannot be that.
Yeah, I agree.
So most men are never going to fit the archetype we have of what an apostolic alpha male, quote unquote,
Yeah, sure.
is like. My point is, I think that we have the bar is very high
Yeah.
for men in church in terms of what it looks like to be successful, right? Fully invested into the church and making it, right?
Yeah.
The bar is very high, and most people are not going to meet that bar. I think the same could be said for women in different ways, but I almost think that the demands on men are higher in some ways because that requires such a unique set of attitudes and skills,
Yeah.
right? You don't get to be a top tier conference preacher without generating a lot of just charisma and connection and a lot of other things that are really beneficial that are hard for tons and tons of men to cultivate. It's a rare thing. And I think it's supposed to be,
Yeah.
right? Not everyone is supposed to be a conference preacher,
Yeah.
but we celebrate more, I think, one version of what apostolic male success looks like,
Absolutely.
right?
What's funny is as a teenager, I even fell into that trap of that is what success was.
Yeah.
And if I wasn't there, I was feeling some level of condemnation.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
didn't feel a call to pulpit ministry.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, I did. Well, like, here's the thing is like, I thought that that's what my call had to be.
Say more about that.
I knew I wanted to serve ministry and
Mm-hmm.
serve in the ministry, but my mind growing up, the only thing that stood out outside of what everyone else did was behind the pulpit or singing or playing instruments, right?
Yeah, you have to have some sort of exceptional talent,
Yeah.
a lot of ways to be seen as reaching that high degree of success,
Yeah.
right?
But what's funny is it wasn't until we moved away and went to Fort Myers and I met Buck, Brother Buck, who was the epitome of what I now consider to be success
Yeah.
in ministry. And he is fully fulfilled in his calling of being an usher and
Yeah.
really ministering to the young men of the church and investing and praying and speaking words of like encouragement. And I've never seen someone so passionate about their role and
Right.
it not being behind a pulpit.
Right, which is huge. And I think the takeaway for me is that like we don't celebrate that kind of
Yeah.
masculinity enough, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't think we celebrate that type of non platform or pulpit calling.
Yeah.
So I imagine growing up as a young man and not fitting into all those categories, right? Maybe you don't feel conventionally attractive. Maybe you don't have a charismatic personality. Maybe you're not a bubbly people person. Maybe you don't dress to a certain degree or can't afford to or don't want to.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't like look super duper culturally apostolic as a man, right? And there's only ever been one definition of what it looks like to make it, to win, right? As an apostolic man, fully embedded in church. In a culture and society where men are under such pressure to win, to accomplish, right? To beat the odds, to dominate. And there's a very, very narrow group of people that are going to be able to hit that in the church. What does that mean for the 90%, more than that maybe, of the other men who don't have any particularly showy platform talent, musical, preaching, otherwise? Oftentimes in small churches, from what I hear, it's women that are driving a lot of the movement of the church. They're organizing things. They're doing a lot of
With
stuff.
like a select few men that
Right.
are, yeah.
So there's not a lot of, my perception is that sometimes there isn't a lot of space for these men to plug in and create their own niche where they're developing their own unique contribution to the church. And then add in, there's a cute girl in your science class or in your college class or at your job who's not in church but seems really kind and sweet and takes active interest in you. And add in, you've had a struggle with pornography that you feel like is weighing you down every time you go to church. You don't have accountability for it.
Yeah, you don't feel like you have someone you can talk to and be transparent with without feeling judged.
Right. All those things, I think the young lions start to leave the pride, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that that's necessarily, it's not every church's situation. It's not every guy's situation. But I think what we find is that a lot of, if you don't find someone to marry and you're not able to build that family focus and step into that leadership role in a home.
Yeah.
And you can't find a leadership role in the church to take ownership of as a man, I think that knocks down a lot of people.
Yeah.
So the folks who remain, the men who remain into extended singleness, and we do work with some of them, right? Either they are just tenacious and absolutely completely sold out and bought into the work of the church, and they are so deeply embedded that it would, the enemy just can't get at them where they are, to
Yeah.
that degree.
Not that the enemy is not trying.
100%. But
Yeah.
they've just built these deep roots, thank God.
Yeah.
And they might be in those great congregations where there is mentorship, or they are able to build a leadership position, thank God. But I don't think a lot of men who are single into their early 30s stay, when it's much easier to go win in the world in some ways, I think.
So what's the answer?
I don't have that right now.
I know. I just don't want to do another podcast where like we point out all the things that are struggling and we don't have at least a 1 degree redirection, right? That kind of starts.
Yeah. So helpful and hopeful takeaways. Let's call it that. Because
Yeah.
I don't have a solution to this.
Yeah, obviously not.
This
like,
is a
and
bigger.
this is also, again, theories. This is also like just from our
Right.
limited perspective.
This might be happening in a certain percentage of churches. There are plenty of other factors why we might not be hearing from as many single men in this area.
Yeah.
So.
But we also have people listening that say, I agree. I've seen it.
Right.
But like, we also have ideas of where we can start growing.
Yeah. So I think some things to take away is, one, we need to be praying for our men.
Yeah.
And I mean, young men that are teenagers, understanding that they're entering a chapter where they have to make some really critical decisions about their level of commitment to church and to truth, and they need support. I say this as the mother of a son who's already worried a little bit about our son not having.
You're worried or he's worried?
I'm worried.
Oh, okay.
He's oblivious.
I was like, he's not worried about anything.
No. I'm worried.
Except for getting his waffle in the morning.
Yeah. Frozen Eggo waffle.
Waffle?
I'm worried about him not having deep connections to the church community the way that I had the privilege of having, or that you did, right? And we have plenty of time to work that out. But like, I want us as a church to be thinking about the fact that discipleship of men matters to everyone. We talked about this during our prayer, but I think that I think one of the reasons why, and I'm not saying that women don't have their own unique spiritual struggles, because we certainly do, but I think one of the reasons why men might be sort of uniquely targeted at this stage is because, like Pastor told us, strong churches are made up of strong families.
Yeah.
And if you take out the team captain, the head of a family, you prevent that strong family unit from being formed.
Yeah.
The church is hampered by that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that they're, men in the headship order are meant to be our team captains.
Yeah.
And to shoulder that headship responsibility. They're meant to be the deacons of the church. They're meant to be the leaders in the church who are driving forward a vision.
Yeah.
When we lose that, we lose a tremendous amount of ground that we could potentially be covering for the kingdom. So we need to be praying for our men and focusing on ways to create more discipleship opportunities for men. I know there are other people working on that. I know that that's not.
Yeah, this is not a new idea.
Right. Men's ministry leaders, the work you're doing is so important. People who are mentoring young men, people who are setting up those armor bearer programs, those things are huge.
Yeah.
And very needed.
I do have a suggestion.
Yeah.
Coming from someone who I would have to say idolized, like, what it meant to be behind the pulpit.
Mm.
And I didn't really care about people liking me or seeing me because I'm a terrible public speaker.
Mm.
But it was more of the idea of, like, I felt like that was my way of being used by God.
Mm-hmm.
And if I wasn't doing that well, then I wasn't being used by God, which
Mm-hmm.
then I've of course learned that that's not the way that happens.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter, like, if it's not taught that there are other, or if it's not encouraged that being used in ministry is being sensitive to God's voice. Mm-hmm. And being used in the fruits, like allowing the fruits to grow from you and given to other people. Mm-hmm. Right? That is ministry. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that I want to suggest is, especially for the younger generation, is to encourage and uphold and uplift the periphery ministries
Yeah.
outside of the pulpit and outside of being a public speaker,
Yeah.
because not everyone is called to that.
No, you don't. So you don't have a New Testament. You don't have the salvation of Paul
Yeah.
without Stephen
Yeah.
feeding widows,
Yeah.
right? You don't have the revival of the early church that Paul led without somebody who was willing to basically do meals on wheels, right?
Yeah.
You don't have the leadership of Paul without having a Priscilla and Aquila.
Yeah.
And Aquila as a role in that, right?
Yeah.
As a member of someone who's hospitable, who opens his home with his wife, who shares his work with a friend,
Yeah.
right? Those are critically important ministries that do not get limelight because nobody was writing letters about them,
Yeah.
right? Because they were just working and serving. But those are the deacons that Paul talks to Timothy about, the people that he wants to have leading the church.
Yeah.
And they are quietly, you know, quietly becoming pillars to the foundation of this community.
I can understand why, though, it's a hard balance to strike,
Mm-hmm.
because with children and teenagers, like, you want to capitalize on momentum,
Mm.
right? And when you're going to church camp and you have a guest speaker preaching on the call of God, and you are a chosen generation,
Mm.
and you are the ones that are going to be responsible for the salvation of the world, and
Sure.
yet, like, what that means is, if you are not preaching and you are not reaching souls, then are you really the chosen generation?
Right.
Right.
And we have
And
this.
again, like, I can see the passion and the zeal and the excitement when there's 100 other kids in the room, but it's the message that's being sent that, like, what if you want to help clean the church?
Well, and it's just,
You know?
we've developed a very narrow understanding of what it means to be an evangelist, right? Like the early church, the first century church, it was two dudes, two friends, backpacking, basically,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? From city to city, hanging out in people's houses and talking about Jesus.
Yeah.
Very different model than what we have today
Yeah.
on the evangelistic circuit. And I'm not knocking it,
No,
right?
and I mean, it's needed.
Yeah, it's needed. That's the way our modern church
Yeah.
functions.
And I think those messages were needed for my childhood.
Sure.
But what I'm saying is, it was also being reinforced from my church too.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm using me as an example, and anyone from my old church, you guys were incredible, like, pillars of my childhood, and I love you guys. Like, I'm not knocking you. I'm just saying that there are some things that, like, I know that there are people that are no longer in church because they felt like they couldn't fit that stereotype.
100%.
They couldn't fit that role.
Right.
When
Especially,
they could be used in so many other areas of the church.
and so it's interesting. So this is also, it ties back into the dating thing too, because I've done polls on Instagram where I'm like, what do you think, what are the stereotypes that you encounter in dating or things that you struggle with? And I've had multiple men comment that women only want to date preachers.
Yeah.
And so not only are we glorifying it from the perspective of like, oh, we should all aspire to that particular flavor of ministry,
Yeah.
right? Which shortchanges the whole gospel, right? When you need all kinds of different people working in a bunch of different areas to do the work. But also, our women may or may not have internalized some of that to where we esteem platform ministry.
Sure.
You know.
Well, okay, let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you just said resonated with me, because I was trying to go back to my childhood and my teenage years. And I felt like that if I was not striving for pulpit, that girls would not like me as much.
Mm-hmm.
In which, because of my struggle with public speaking, it added to my insecurity. So now it's compounding, right? So from a girl's perspective, did you feel pressure to want to marry a preacher?
So yes and no. We've talked about this a little bit before. I don't think that women are all dead set on marrying preachers, but preachers seem like a good bet because supposedly,
Yeah, the relationship.
they have a good relationship with God.
Yeah.
They're hopefully operating in ministry. They're focused on that, right? So their priorities are right. They have to be relatively intelligent. You
Yeah.
have to be able to pull out a sermon, make it make sense, and communicate it to a bunch of people.
Yeah.
They have to be skilled and talented, right? They have to uphold a certain level of decency and set themselves up as an example. Whether or not a woman wants to be the wife of someone who is a pulpit minister,
Sure.
being a pulpit minister is attractive
Yeah.
to a lot of women because, and there are some women who will say that it's not their thing, but a lot of women find safety in that, right?
Yeah.
It's about security and the
Yeah.
skills that it entails.
It's the fastest and quickest way, I guess the same thing, to see a lot of the check boxes that are important when you're trying to look for a spouse.
Supposedly.
Public facing.
Sure.
That's
Now,
the thing.
I've talked to a lot of women who used to be married to ministers.
Sure.
Who
And ministers and pulpit
ministers
ministers
are human.
evangelists are just humans.
100%. Who found after they'd gotten into those relationships that there was a lot of stuff under the surface that person needed to work on, right?
Yeah.
Not knocking it. So my point is, though, I think a lot of women do find that as an additional attractive factor because of all the things that come along with it, even if they themselves aren't like aspiring to be a pastor's wife or a preacher's wife.
Yeah.
Because a lot of women don't really care about being a preacher's wife.
Yeah, sure.
They want a minister,
Yeah.
right? And they see someone who is already focused on the things of the kingdom as someone who will enable them to do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I do think women do find that attractive in some ways. And it, there is we're apostolics. You do have to be a little charismatic to get up and command a room like that, right?
Sure.
And that's fun. You have to have a sense of humor. You have to be, passionate. All of those things are things that women have been socialized to find really attractive.
Yeah.
And that I think just are attractive, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
So, yeah, I do think that in dating, we've set that up as a thing. I want to kind of circle back and tie all this in, right? What we're saying is that there's a very narrow set of success criteria within the church sometimes, in some churches, for a lot of our men.
Yeah.
In ways that women maybe don't experience, right? Because if you're a woman, you can be a ladies leader, you can run the nursery, you can be a Sunday school teacher, you can go do missions, and a lot of those things are more or less the same.
Yeah, there's a lot more socially acceptable ministries
right
available.
in the sense that a woman in any of those ministries is not necessarily considered to be a more or less important and significant minister, right?
No, of course not.
There's not really a hierarchy of those things.
Yeah.
I think women have different limitations on the kind of ministry they can do.
Sure.
But yeah, so women have in some ways a much broader set of success criteria.
Yeah.
If you're living a holy life
Yeah.
and you're doing all these different things, like you can be a successful apostolic woman,
Yeah.
right?
And now being a part of the church as an adult for a long time now,
Mm-hmm.
one of the biggest things that keeps new converts and people who are struggling coming to church is making them feel like they have some sort of involvement in running it. Right?
You have to be able to be
And
invested.
so I can see if there are more areas for women to be used, why we have a higher success rate
Mm-hmm.
than socially acceptable areas for men to be used.
I also think, and this is a little spicy, I think women are also socialized to seek out places to help more than men are.
Oh, take Thanksgiving, cleanup or Thanksgiving, or like anytime you have a family event,
Mm-hmm.
like it's the guys falling asleep on the couch while the women are probably putting away the stuff.
All
and
those
doing all this stuff.
stereotypes,
Yeah.
right? It was just American culture where we tell our young women that you have to be serving, you have to be doing
Yeah,
to the
sure.
point of martyrdom, right? And we don't necessarily force that idea into the minds of our men.
Sorry, Mom.
You do great.
Sorry, Aunt Debbie.
It's got pros and cons,
Yeah.
right? Like I think that there's an unhealthy degree that we push that on women, that they should just work until their hands fall off, right?
Yeah, sure.
But at the same time, if we're not cultivating that in men, we're not really creating an environment where they feel free to take agency to just go do something.
Yeah.
Right? It takes a lot of initiative and sort of like gumption to be a young man in a church where there's not a clearly defined role for you to go make one.
Yeah.
And probably to wrest that task out of the hand of a very capable woman who's been doing it for 35 years, right? So
Yeah.
like I'm making stereotypes here, but I think that the idea is there's narrow success criteria. There's a ton of pressure from the world telling men that they need to be all these different things, right? Not just that they need to be sexually promiscuous and, working and all that. They also need to be physically commanding. They need to be hyper, muscular. They need to be extra masculine. They need to be all these other different things.
Yeah. They need to also not show any signs of emotions or else you're weak.
Right. Lack of vulnerability,
Yeah.
lack of safe spaces for men to express themselves.
Yeah.
All of these things compounding in a church in a way that I think leaves men feeling isolated.
Yeah.
More likely to feel isolated and separated from the church body. And we've met guys with tons of different types of personalities.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
It runs the gamut. So I don't.
Even as we're talking about this, like I'm thinking of like completely opposite people to what we're explaining. But
100%.
We're intentionally being general.
Right. So what I find in the men who have stayed through extended singleness in that period of life, it usually has to do with the fact that they are deeply embedded in the work of the church somewhere.
Yeah.
And they've really been sharpened by that, because the work of the church is also where you're edified, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a big part of how you sharpen yourself just as a Christian. So their walk is deep, their roots are deep, they're well grounded. And sometimes it's because they've done all those things and they haven't met someone because they have significant barriers that they're trying to work around. And those can be a huge variety, but basically they have enough keeping them there that it doesn't really make sense for them to leave to go find a dating partner, for example. Or like a dating partner by itself would not be enough to draw someone away,
I'm sure there's a message I've heard elsewhere about this, but I just thought of a really cool analogy, especially because we've been dabbling with planting fruit trees in our yard and stuff.
Wait, say that again, because it sounds like you said fir cheese.
Sorry. Fruit trees.
Yeah.
When someone is kept in a container or in a given spot for so long and they don't have the space for their roots to be able to grow and grow deeper, they get root bound and they eventually choke themselves out. Whereas if they get up potted and given controlled space to grow and allow the roots to go deeper and deeper and deeper until eventually they can be planted into the ground and be able to grow roots and stand strong in the winds.
Yeah.
Like it's someone staying in the same spot for so long and not given any more room to grow can kill them spiritually.
So I do think we need to start celebrating those other places in the church where men can plug in.
Yeah.
And if you're a leader listening to this, specifically delegating tasks to the men in your church in that phase of life, put them in charge of something. Whatever it is, can be small, right? Doesn't have to be, a pulpit ministry, but it needs to be something that they have ownership of.
Yeah. If you're a man listening to this and you would like to have some sort of accountability, I have found it best to not wait for someone to ask you.
Yeah.
You go seek someone out who you respect spiritually, who you feel like would be honest with you. And go and ask them to take them out for a cup of coffee or have a conversation with them and say, hey, I look up to you, I respect you, and I would love it if you could mentor me and be my accountability. And because I would like to grow and I feel like I need someone to be able to confide in that I trust won't judge me when I'm honest.
Yeah. And, I've watched you intentionally do this a few times where in our different settings you've basically picked people to be that person for you, and you've gone and had honest conversations with them about that. You don't pick your best buddy necessarily.
No.
It has to be someone who can sharpen you spiritually.
I mean, I'm good friends with these people.
Right. But you don't just go like, oh, this is my best friend, so he's my accountability partner. Like you go, who has the qualities that I need to cultivate more, who can hold me accountable to those things, and you seek that person out. Which I really respect and am grateful for. So I don't want to leave anyone feeling hopeless. If you're a woman who's listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, it's true, all the good men are gone. No. No. They are out there. There are many, many men who are just absolutely dedicated and are doing a lot. But I do think that there are some really unique challenges for guys, especially in that really critical period where women who experience extended singleness are often deeply embedded in the church and have a lot of accountability by nature of the work that they're doing. Men might not. So I think that have more potential to put down those deep roots, even as a single person sometimes. So we need to pray for our men. We need to hold them up. We need to find places for them to plug in. I think maybe the most immediate takeaway is we need to start having more conversations about this idea.
That's why we want to do this podcast tonight, not to solve all the problems, but just to open up the conversation.
Yeah, like we need, like, I keep coming back to the phrase, like, you know, we need to figure out where the young lions go. Like, there are men who are needed as champions of the church who we're losing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's happening, I think, often fairly silently. And re-entry isn't always easy.
No, of course not.
So I know that we're probably not the only ones talking about this. And if you are, you know, if you have connections to people in men's ministry or young adult ministry who are thinking about this and would want to chat about it, I'm interested in starting this conversation. I want to start thinking about ways we could gather some data to sort of like verify this to some degree.
Yeah. And if you feel like we were completely off the mark, please feel free to leave us a comment.
That'd be great too. I hope that we're wrong about some of this.
Yeah, sure.
You know, again, like this is all kind of conjecture based on the bits and pieces that we're starting to see of this puzzle.
Yeah.
And I hope that we're just seeing a very small corner and maybe the whole picture is different.
Yeah.
And that most churches don't have this issue.
Yeah. I hope we're completely biased and wrong and all the men are doing great.
Yeah. I hope so too. So give us a thumbs up if you're a guy who's doing great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want, I want us to start opening up the conversation.
Sorry. I just thought of, I'm not trying to mock anyone, I promise. I just thought of like hashtag still here after 30.
Oh gosh. Yeah, no, it's rough out there.
Yeah.
It's rough. So yeah, definitely leave us a comment and let us know if you feel like this resonates. I know we wandered a lot from topic to topic. I know we didn't cover this exhaustively, but we'll circle back.
Yeah.
Couple of things, announcement wise. So you can still go reserve your cabin for Singles at Sea.
Yep.
Next February. You'll be able to do that all the way through January of 2026. So there's plenty of time, but I'd encourage you to go ahead and reach out to Chelsea, who is our travel coordinator. Her information is in the description. And check in about pricing, see when you would, when it's best to reserve. You only need $200 to reserve your cabin. And that's for two people. So if you go with a friend, you can both put up $100 and then you're good. Right. Yep. So go ahead and have that conversation with Chelsea sooner rather than later. We'd love to see more people come on board.
Yep.
We have not been doing a great job of announcing singles conferences. We talked about doing that.
Yeah, we also wanted people to let us know when their singles conference is.
Right. So if you have a singles conference that's coming up that you'd like us to promote, please reach out.
We live in a big country.
Yeah.
With a lot of different single conferences, so we can't look up every single one of them.
Yeah. We've also been doing a thing where we're happy to ship some sync pens to conferences. So that is, we're finding that that's probably a more reliable way for us to get sync pens out, because the way that we ship them in the mail can be very hit or miss in terms of like,
we've been having real struggles with different post offices, like accepting them and not accepting them, or borders like holding them for weeks at a time, like
just because of those, like, they're small packages, they're lightweight, it gets weird with like postage in places or whatever.
Yeah.
So we've had reports of some of them getting broken in shipping when we ship them individually.
Yeah, we've had some return in the mail that were like mangled. We're like, what in the world?
Yeah, so shipping a big box of them to singles conferences in some ways is better for all parties involved. Yeah. So if you have a singles conference that's coming up and you'd like help promoting it, and you would want to maybe put out some Synchrony pens that people can take advantage of, we'd love to help and support you with that.
Yeah, we'd be happy to send you.
Yeah.
I think that's all.
Cool. Hey.
Hey.
I love you.
I love you too.
It's nice to get back into the swing of this.
Yeah. I'm sorry you didn't marry a preacher.
I am not. I am not mad at it. What's funny?
You marry someone who can barely talk English.
No. No, don't put yourself down. You're part of the problem. No.
Yeah, that's true.
No, it's good. It's one of those things where you know, again, it's like values identification, right?
Yeah.
You have to know why you want the things that you want. And it turns out I don't actually want to necessarily be married to a preacher, you know.
Well, I'm glad
Yeah.
because right now that's not the season. I'm not saying I'm not open to it if God moves me in that direction, but He's got to work on me like He worked on Moses.
Yeah. That'll be fine.
I just need an Aaron in my life.
Yeah, that's what it is. Cool. All right, guys. Have a wonderful week.
All right. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.